next speaker is, well, actually, just thought of this. Raise your hand if you were at the first Secular Student Alliance conference in the year 2000 at the University of Minnesota. It's me and that guy. That's our next speaker. That's Dan Barker, a man who really needs no introduction, but is apparently going to get two of them, because Dan asked me about this, and I was like, yeah, but I want to say some things first. So first, yeah, point that out. The other thing is, Dan keeps accusing me of being really young. Well, Dan, I printed out an email, so counter evidence to me still being really young. Did not even realize this until I walked up here, like, oh, I could have read it off my phone. Anyway, earlier today, got an email from Dan Barker that says, oh, I should point out, it is copied to a lovely email address, attorneys@ffrf.org. I checked into the Blackwell Inn today on the campus of The Ohio State University. They tell me it is part of the OSU system, connected with one of the colleges. There is a Gideon Bible in the room. I will complain personally, but we should research and send them a formal letter of complaint. DB. Yeah, so yes, indeed. Not unlike Alexander Hamilton and Amanda Scott, you are nonstop, Dan. But I will hand it over to other Dan to introduce you again.
Hi. It's great to see all of you from up here again. Many of you are students in SSA groups, and many of you have been hearing about these wonderful SSA services and resources that we've been talking about this whole weekend. And a lot of you are just discovering the Speakers Bureau. You're discovering that there are these speaker events that your group can host, and you're discovering that many of those speakers actually go on speaker tours once a semester, maybe once a year, and hit up lots of groups in your area. When I was president of my SSA group many years ago, Dan Barker was the very first speaker we had ever hosted, and it was a total blast. He is, I'm not joking about this, as many speakers as I've worked with all over the country, all over the movement, he is the nicest one you could ever imagine working with, and I'm very serious about that. The whole organization, the whole FFRF organization, everyone there is wonderful. I've worked with many of them, but I think I've done 4 tours, I think organized 4 of his tours since then, and they have all been absolutely wonderful. And as many things that could just ever like unexpectedly go wrong, he is absolutely wonderful to work with. I really can't say that enough. Like this one time he was at UC Davis, which is not a car-friendly campus at all. I am following about 10 minutes behind from the airport, and then I actually get lost on campus, even though I'm very familiar with it, and I'm kind of in stuck one of those like weird areas where the barricade comes down and closes you off, and then I call the organizer and say, hey, I'm not going to be there. I'm stuck in this area. And they said, hey, that's where Dan Barker's stuck at too. And then I'm like, well, okay, I'm getting the heck out of here. I somehow get out. I'm on my way to the event. I somehow figure out that he is now a few blocks behind me. I'm waving him into the garage, and then we're about 3 minutes to the start of the event, and he comes out and says, it's an adventure. And I'm thinking, how many speakers would have that reaction to that, where they don't even are going to make it to their own gig on time because someone didn't give them the right directions? But without further ado, the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Dan Barker.
I forgot about that. That was fun. Yeah, life, you only live life once, so it should be an adventure, shouldn't it? So thank you, August. It was great. I actually saw August's college room back in 90, when was it, 97?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah?
Yeah. And it was very neat and tidy. It was one of the most clean rooms you could ever have.
You'll get your check later now.
So, there's this atheist woman, and she's married to a Christian husband. And they love each other very much. And they respect each other. And one day, the husband says to her, would you like to come to church with me someday? And she says, sure, I could go to church with you. That would be really interesting. So she went to church, and there was this choir singing, and there was these announcements, and there was, they passed the offering plate around. There was this lengthy sermon, and there was a benediction and all that stuff that goes on. And afterwards, the pastor went up to the wife and said, well, it's great to see you in church this Sunday. So, do you believe? Do you believe now? And she said, yes, I do believe. After listening to your lengthy sermon, I now believe in eternity. I wrote that joke, by the way. And if you ever tell it, you owe me a nickel each time you tell it. So I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation with Annie Laurie Gaylor. We're in Madison, Wisconsin. We're having our convention in Pittsburgh. It's at our 39th annual convention. We went national in 1978 with just a handful of people. We now have 24,000 members, 24,000 paid-up dues-paying members, not just a list, but people all over the country who support keeping state and church separate, who believe that the best hope, one of the best hopes for the world is secular government, where the church and the state stay completely separate. We have 7 full-time attorneys working very, very hard. Plus, this summer, there are 5 legal interns. And if any of you are interested in law and want a good place to intern, it's a really fun place to work. It's just a blast. We do a lot of letters, a lot of litigation. We have about 12 or 14 cases in the courts at any one time, including I'm suing the chaplain of the House of Representatives. That's a fun lawsuit. You might have seen the big ad in the New York Times. We're also suing the IRS over the housing allowance and over the 990 form, if you know about what that is. The housing allowance gives clergy a special break that no one else gets in the country. Clergy don't have to report their housing as income. It drastically lowers their tax liability, so they pay a lot less taxes. And we don't think that's fair. We think leaders of any nonprofit should get it, or they shouldn't get it at all. So we sue high schools over 10 Commandments monuments. We sue over nativity scenes. In fact, we're suing the governor of Texas. I used to think whoever followed Rick Perry couldn't be worse. But Abbott is there now, and he actually took down our winter solstice birth of the Bill of Rights nativity scene from the state capitol after we had a permit and an approval to put it up. So we're suing him under equal access and free speech and all of that. So Annie Laurie says there's nothing in the world more fun than suing the government. And especially when you win. But I got to tell you something. If you're ever thinking of suing the IRS, be sure you have been scrupulous with your own taxes. This U.S. attorney came in and we went through 2 whole days of depositions. She had a big binder like this on me with all my past tax returns, going through every little thing. They're looking for any way to knock you out of the lawsuit. We passed it, but boy, it was a grueling couple of days of depositions. Anyway, come visit us in Madison, Wisconsin. We expanded our national offices. We had a staff lunch Tuesday, the largest one we've ever had. There were 28 people at our staff lunch. No spouses, no friends, just staff and interns. And so we're growing. We quadrupled our space last year. And now our attorneys have this new concept. It's called offices. They can actually work. They have places to work. So it's just a lot of fun. If you see a problem, if you see a violation of state-church separation in your area anywhere, it could be, there's dozens of things it could be. Who are you going to call? Go to our website, FFRF.org. There's a legal intake form. We just had to hire a full-time person just to handle the intake. Last year we got over 4,000 complaints from people. And maybe some of you have sent some in. About various issues. And so they've got it down to a pretty good system there. So usually we can get a letter out like that day even. And especially like if you find out, hey, they're going to say a prayer at my graduation next Tuesday. Well, we have to get on it right now. So, but I tell you, working for the foundation is a lot more fun than preaching. I used to be a preacher, as you know, and I tell the story in my book, Godless, how an evangelical preacher became one of America's leading atheists. Tonight I'm talking about Life-Driven Purpose, which is a book that came out last year by Pitchstone Publishing. And by the way, Pitchstone has a table, and tomorrow at noon they're going to have book sales. The OSU store is going to be selling books. So if you want one of Candace's books, where's Candace? Or Fernando's book will be there. Who else here has a book? Ryan, right? Yeah, Ryan has a book through Pitchstone. They'll be available there at noon. So, Rick Warren, you know, is the megachurch pastor who did the inaugural prayer for Obama's first inauguration. He wrote a book called Purpose-Driven Life. My book is called Life-Driven Purpose, because I think religionists have got it upside down. They have this top-down hierarchical system where we non-believers are bottom-up. And he came to our attention back in the late 1990s, Rick Warren, when he sued the IRS. And his records were not in order. Turns out that Rick Warren got his church to declare his entire salary a housing allowance. Not just the amount he spends on housing, but the whole thing. So he reported zero income and paid zero taxes that year. And the IRS said, wait a minute, that's stretching the law. Of course, a lot of clergy think they can get away with that. They think they're special. And so they penalized him. They made a determination. The IRS said, that's wrong. You're cheating the government by declaring your entire salary a housing allowance when you're only spending part of it on housing. So what did Rick Warren do when he got that determination from the IRS? He sued the IRS. It's called Warren versus Tax Commission. And Congress stepped in and got him off the hook. They changed the wording so that from now on, the housing allowance has to be limited to the fair market value. So Rick Warren's congregation might have a purpose-driven life, but their pastor has a loophole-driven life. He's working the system. And they do. This whole idea that there is a master above us, that there is a clergy, harkens back to theocracy, doesn't it? That there's a higher level of people in this country. In this country, who is proudly rebellious. We fought a revolutionary war, kicking out the sovereign, the master, the lord, the king, the dictator, the monarch. And what did we do? We took everything from a top-down model, and we flipped everything upside down. We were the first country in history to have not some sovereign authority above us. What's the highest authority in the United States? What's the first words of the Constitution? We the people. It's a bottom-up kind of a system, not a top-down. Religion is all top-down, authoritarian, Vatican, Lord, God, Master. Have you ever noticed the postures of prayer? What are the postures of prayer? They're identical to the postures of slavery, right? There's the master up there. Oh, yes, Lord, you are big. And what is this when your wrists are like this? What is that? The wrists are shackled together so that you're no threat to the master up there. Yes, I submit to you, and you bow down and you're humble. I am little and you are big, and I am small and you are great. Oh yes, let's glorify and magnify you. In Rick Warren's book, Purpose-Driven Life, have any of you read it? Dan, you've actually read it? Oh. Well, you don't have to read it. I mean, it's a 40-chapter book. Something about 40. The number 40 is like 40 days and 40 nights. Rick Warren, the very first sentence of his book says, it's not about you. You were put on this planet with a purpose, and it's not about you. It's about the sovereign, the Lord, the Master. Your purpose was determined before you were born. And so guess what's the first sentence of my book? It is about you. It's not top down, it's bottom up. So when I was a minister of the gospel, I used to preach the really good news that there's a hell. Do you know what the good news of the gospel is? I've done this a lot, but I was asked to do this again. So the good news is like this. Suppose you're walking by my house someday, and I come out on the front porch and I say, hey, stop for a minute. I got some good news for you. I got some great news. You want to hear this? Stop. So you stop and look up. What? I've got some really good news for you. You don't have to go down in my basement. Isn't that good news? Really, all these months you've been walking by my house, you've been ignoring me. And I'm great. I'm important. I'm somebody special. And you just haven't been paying me any attention. And that made me so angry. so mad that I built a torture chamber down in my basement. There's fire down there, and there's knives, and there's hooks on the wall, and there's this big vat of stinky chemicals, and it's horrible down there. But you don't have to go down there. I sent my son down there. And he suffered, and it was horrible, and he bled. But that satisfied my anger. And so I'm not mad at you anymore. He paid the price for you. All you have to do is come up here. Come on, come up to my porch. And then just give my son a big hug and tell him thank you for what he did for you. And come up, and we'll live upstairs together forever, and you can tell me how great I am forever and ever. Isn't that the best news you've ever heard? So what would you do? Would you keep walking? Or Sorry, I got to get to class. You know, I got things to do. So I'm sure you've all debated with believers before, and I think there's some value in that. I think there is. I wish you had come up to me when I was that guy on campus. You know that guy I'm talking about? The guy with the Bible under his arm, with the super smile of Jesus, and the love and the confidence that, hey, I've got a message. Who would not want that message, right? I was fearless. Richard Dawkins writes in the foreword to my book, Godless, Dan wasn't just a preacher. He's the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. Because I just knew that it wasn't coincidence. God brought you there to sit next to me so that I could share the love. And of course, once you saw the love in my eyes and felt it, you would just want to have this meaning and purpose. And so you probably talk with believers, different denominations and persuasions, and at the end of it, some of them will say, and I've done a lot of debates too, and this happens a lot, they will say things like, and even Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother, said something like this. Well, okay, maybe there's no real evidence, and maybe the arguments aren't that great, and maybe, you know, maybe, yeah, you can be good without God. But if there is no God, there's no meaning in life. So you better just believe, because don't you want to have meaning in life? Have you heard that argument? Life is meaningless and empty without God, right? So I think asking the question, if there's no God, what is the meaning of life? It's just like asking the question, if there's no master, whose slave will I be? Right? How can I find my meaning and direction? They think, and Rick Warren thinks, purpose is something that's bestowed from above us, that's handed down to us. Like you're a member of the military and you have a commanding officer who tells you, here's your orders, and at the end of life, that commanding officer is going to say, good job, well done, I'm glad that you did your part. And a lot of believers sitting in the pews are exactly like that. They want somebody to tell them, what are my marching orders? Why am I here? What should I do? What's it all about? And if you had sat next to me on the bus, I would even ask you that. Do you know why you're here on this planet? Do you know what it's all about? You know, I can tell you're going through some real struggles in your life right now, aren't you? How does he know? You're having a problem with a personal relationship in your life right now, and it's really getting to you, isn't it? How does he know? It's silly. It's the stupid techniques that evangelists have to do, and you know what? They work. They actually work with a big cross-section of the population who are gullible, who do want somebody up there and above to tell them, you know, what to do, how to live their lives. So, in my book, I describe what I think real purpose is, and I think they equivocate. I think Rick Warren equivocates because purpose, really, what purpose means, it's striving for a goal. You have something you're trying to attain or something you're trying to avoid, right? Any living organism that's trying to get something or trying to avoid it has some purpose in this goal of theirs. But purpose is also used in a secondary sense, like what's the purpose of this hammer on the wall? The hammer doesn't have any internal drive or purpose, right? You're really asking what's the purpose in the mind of the person who designed the hammer. So a hammer, if you didn't know what a hammer was, you might be able to kind of reverse engineer, what its purpose is. But to ask what is the purpose of life is kind of like asking what is the purpose of a hammer? Why was it designed? Why is it there? You might want to do something else. You might want to juggle with it. You might, you could use it as a weapon. What else could you do with it? There's a lot of things you could do with a hammer. But you're still asking, when you ask what is the purpose of a hammer, you're really assuming the hammer doesn't have any life of its own. It's just a tool. It's an implement. So asking what is the purpose of life is just like that. And I think the really good news, the good news is not that you don't have to go down in the basement. The really good news that we non-believers offer the world. And this might sound weird, it might sound counterintuitive, it might even sound wrong, it might even sound like an admission of failure. But I think the best news we atheists and non-believers offer to the world is this. There is no purpose of life. Life is its own reward. If there were a purpose of life, we would be secondary. We would be subservience. We would be the hammer. We would be, we would be like slaves before a master who tells us what we must do. There is no purpose of life. But to say there's no purpose of life doesn't mean there's no purpose in life. And that's the purpose that matters. Not a top-down, driven from authority kind of purpose, but a bottom-up, life-driven purpose from our own desires, our own lacks, our own position in this world, our own feelings, our own fears and desires and wants that drive us toward a goal. And no one tells me what that is. And nobody tells you what that is. If they do, you're a servant. So when parents have children, do they, and by the way, I have 5 kids, and listening to that last talk, I was reminded of the day I went in for a medical procedure in 1990. I didn't have to march past an army of protesters questioning whether I, as a man, had thought about what I was doing to my body. I didn't have to run by a bunch of people telling me I needed to wait 24 hours, because as a male I have the prerogative. Men of course, can be considered to have thought about this. And to control their own reproductive future, is something that we just own that right. But if you're a female, wait a minute. Have you thought about this? Are you smart? Are you really sure you know what you're doing? Anyway, I knew what I was doing, and I think every woman knows what she's doing too as well. And it's a bottom-up thing. It shouldn't be some authority telling us from above. So, as long as there are problems, then there's going to be purpose. As long as there's a problem in life, and it could be anything. There's hundreds of things you could think of that are problems in life. Hunger and thirst, of course, lack of water, or lack of safe water, inequality, or oppression, or sexism, or racism, or violence, or war, or disease, or predation, or you could add to that list. The world that we live in confronts us with all sorts of problems, inequality in that, and even positive problems, like the problems of gaining scientific knowledge can be fierce. The problems of creating art, the problems that are involved with that are positive things. As long as there are problems of some sort or challenges of some sort, there will be purpose in life. Who would dare say that someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Frederick Douglass or Margaret Sanger or W.E.B. Du Bois didn't have purpose in their lives? Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who worked for a half a century for this crazy idea that women should be able to participate in their own democracy. And she was an atheist, and yet she lived her life with a life-driven purpose to try to solve a problem. So I'm not going to get up here, and August is not going to get up here, and Fernando's not going to get up here as kind of like a pope of atheism. And here we're going to dispense to the diocese of atheists. Here's what thou shalt. We're not going to do that. That would be silly. You would all leave, right? You would all think, that's dumb. We're all equal. I think atheism and agnosticism and secularism is it's a movement, I suppose, demographically, but it's a movement with no followers. Isn't that weird? Most movements have followers, but here's a movement with no followers. We're all leaders in this thing. We're all equal. There's no clergy and higher up. So whatever it is in your life, whatever your temperament, maybe you find purpose, or maybe you create purpose. Either way, maybe you find it because one of your siblings dies of some rare disease, and you say, I'm going to dedicate my life to fighting that disease. There's a life-driven purpose. Maybe you find it because either you are gay or you know someone who's gay who's being oppressed, and you say, I don't like that. I'm going to go after that. I'm going to fight that. So life-driven purpose is a life of real meaning and real drive. So I remember I was invited, when was it, maybe 10 years ago, to Canada. There was a World Religions Conference being held up in Canada. And they called me on the phone and said, we would like to have an atheist at the World Religions Conference. And I said, well, that's kind of cool, but atheism's not a religion. So how can I come to a World Religion Conference when it's not a religion? And they said, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, they called back and they said, okay, we're going to change it to World Religions and Philosophy Conference. Now would you come? I said, all right, well then I'll go. That was cool. So I sat up on the stage with a Hindu and a Muslim, and they're all wearing their basic garments, and a Buddhist and a Roman Catholic and a Native American spiritualist and a Protestant. We're on the stage, and the topic for this conference was salvation. What does salvation mean to your respective religious traditions? And so, of course, you can imagine what they all talked about, what salvation meant to them. And when it got to me, they were wondering, what's the atheist going to say? What does salvation mean to an atheist? And, of course, I said, there's a couple of things in the Bible that I actually agree with. Jesus, if he ever existed and ever said this, but whoever wrote it had Jesus say that they who are healthy don't need the doctor. It's only they who are sick. That kind of makes sense, right? And he said, I have come to save those who are sick and sinful. So in the religious traditions, most religious traditions, salvation is the solution to a problem called sin. But since we atheists don't believe there's such a thing as sin, we think it's a phony solution to a phony problem. It's kind of like, how much respect would you have for a doctor who runs around cutting people with a knife so they can sell them a Band-Aid? You know, it's like they're creating the problem and then they're saying, we're going to solve that problem. You know, or an abusive husband who hits his wife and says, oh, honey, I'll take care of those bruises for you. I mean, that's weird, isn't it? That's kind of a sick system. And what I said was, since there is no such thing as sin or salvation, in the sense we live our lives as biological organisms from the bottom up, and the reporter put this in the paper the next morning, I said, if salvation is the cure, then atheism is the prevention. We're not sick, are we?